Welcome to the KBB From the Tap podcast. I'm Managing Editor Leslie Claggett, and this week I'm happy to talk with architect Wayne Turett. Wayne started his firm, the Turett Collaborative, in 1991. Based in the Tribeca neighborhood of New York City, it's a multidisciplinary office that spans the practice of architecture and interior design, graphics, custom product, and furniture design. Be sure to subscribe to KBB's YouTube channel and click the like button on our videos. You can also subscribe to KBB's From the Tap podcast on such apps as Apple, Spotify, Pandora, and Google Podcasts, and please feel free to leave a review. Today we're going to discuss how designers can complete kitchen and bath renovations with the least amount of waste, while creating a more sustainable space. Welcome, Wayne, and thank you for joining me.
You're welcome. Happy to be here.
Waste can be applied to processes as well as materials. For the purpose of our discussion, can you define what you mean by waste?
So waste in terms of the kitchen and the bath can occur in many forms. They could be just a waste of resources, materials, water, energy, and in general, a waste is also, wasting your time is a waste of resources. But when you are doing a renovation of a kitchen and bath, and it may also be part of a bigger renovation. We meaning the contractors tend to order additional materials just in case something goes wrong. So what happens to those materials after the renovation's finished? So there's a bit of waste there. There's a bit of waste in water if you don't manage water properly. But those are the areas that I'm thinking about.
Okay. Would you say that kitchens and baths are the most wasteful spaces in a home?
They are in a pure sense, right? Compared to a bedroom. Bedrooms don't have running water, but bathrooms do, kitchens do. And, running water could be wasteful. So in a pure sense, they are the most wasteful spaces, but they don't have to be more wasteful than they can be.
What do you mean by that?
Well, you can and you should design these spaces with low flow fixtures, so you save water. They can be designed so that kitchens can be designed so you don't have fossil fuels, and you can cook everything with electric. And if you're really conscientious, you can install solar panels if you have a single family house, and your electric stove and oven and all your other appliances can be powered by renewable resources. And so even though they are, in a sense, they use electricity and they use water, they don't have to be very wasteful.
Can you talk about what the benefits of minimizing waste in a renovation project entails? Does it contribute to sustainability?
Ultimately, it does. The less resources you use and then throw out, the less resources go into landfill, the less resources have to be made. For instance, in a renovation, you have extra sheetrock usually, you have extra plumbing, you have extra wiring, you have, in additions, you have extra roofing. And so I think that if you can order more carefully, you can minimize that waste. But the benefits of minimizing waste is obviously you have less waste to put into landfill. You have less waste. Manufacturers don't have to make as much. And a big problem these days is, what do you do with all that extra material?
And what do you do with it?
Well,
If there is any, of course.
I talk a big story here, but the fact is that it's very hard to find places for this. It's sort of a pet peeve of mine when I do houses. All of that material that's being thrown out into landfill is heartbreaking. There's lots of, let's say, 5-foot 2x4s. They only need to be 3 more feet. And if you could find a way to combine a 3-foot and a 5-foot together in a sustainable and structural way, you don't have to throw that out. Some ideas that I have are, can construction sites sort this stuff out at the site? So for instance, wood is a different resource than, let's say, insulation or extra sheetrock or plumbing materials or caulking. So put that into one dumpster and put wood into another. And I'm starting to think that I might try to start something out east on the end of Long Island, where the contractors are doing a lot of building and houses, to see if I can implement that. It would certainly be better to try to use that stuff than to throw it away.
Sure. What do you anticipate the contractor's response will be to your idea?
I think it's a hard sell. Everybody's used to doing things the way they are used to doing them, right? So, one idea I have is to create an example project to reuse materials from these job sites to create a garage or a shed or something which says this was wholly created out of reused materials. And I'm trying to get at least one contractor interested to put in the time and the effort. And I think that project like that could actually get enough publicity to start to change the conversation.
Yeah.
It's like a proof of concept.
Right, exactly. And are you envisioning this just to be the shell structure, or would you go inside and actually do a small bath or a kitchenette installation?
Well, I would do as much as I can. So for instance, there are places that recycle things like appliances, windows, doors. That has sort of taken root a little bit. I know in Brooklyn, there's a warehouse that does that. There was a place out east that did that too, but I don't know if they still exist. But the bigger things like that are kind of easier to recycle because they're a unit in themselves. And there are some renovations that take place where appliances are not more than 10 years old. So
Right.
they're probably still good. And why not use them?
Well, do you find yourself having to convince clients that they don't have to replace their appliances or their bathroom fittings?
No, when someone does a renovation, they really want to, renew the place.
Right.
So it really does mean taking that stuff out. But sometimes it's not that old and it's not that bad. I'm sort of a dumpster diver from way back, and I gather lots of materials that I like to reuse. I've been doing it for years. On job sites, I often take things like plumbing fixtures and appliances that clients don't want because they're being replaced. And then I try to find uses for them. not always successful. But, I guess I'm a minor hoarder. But, a lot of times when it comes to sustainability and these kinds of questions about energy efficiency and water management, clients aren't always up to date on that. And so sometimes it's hard to convince them that that's an important thing to do.
How would you go about convincing a client?
Well, I design very energy efficient projects. So, and the ultimate of that is a passive house. I don't know if you're familiar with that term, but it's a very, very energy efficient home that's very sealed up. And because it's so sealed up, it uses something called an ERV to bring in fresh air. And so I stopped trying to talk to people about energy efficiency and sustainability, and I talk to them more about the fresh air in their house.
Yeah.
And so that's one way to convince them that this is a better way of building. I think sometimes they're short-sighted because they can afford to pay more in electrical than, for instance, trying to bring their electric bill down because it's an energy efficient house. They could afford to pay more, so it's not that important to them. And talking about the environment is only, it only resonates with some. So for instance, I had one client when we're talking about waste, and they said that we were renovating the house and the kitchen was new, and they were adamant. They said to the contractor, we don't want the cabinets being taken out to put into landfill. So they were really on board. And they were on board with lots of energy efficient tweaks and moves, but not everybody is. But most of our projects are more energy efficient than most, just because that's the way we design.
In your experience, is it a generational decision? Are younger clients more inclined to follow your guidance here?
Well, I believe that, the 20 to 30-year-old younger generation would be, but I don't get a lot of clients in that age group. Probably because they don't own their homes yet. And if they do, they're not having a lot of, disposable income to renovate them. So, my clients are usually older and, they're in a different economic bracket.
Why don't we turn the conversation to specific products and technologies? What are some products designers can use in kitchen renovations that minimize waste and enhance sustainability?
Well, I think the big thing in kitchens to do that is to go all electric and not to use gas appliances. And I get a lot of pushback from clients about that because everybody's used to cooking with gas in New York City, at least. I know in the rest of the country, there's a lot more diversity, I think. And a lot of places in the wider United States use electric to heat and to cook. But with the advent of induction stoves, cooking with electric is a different game altogether. The old electric stoves were very slow and they were hard to control, but induction is very, very different. And there's a lot of chefs coming out now talking about how induction is working well for them. So it's getting easier and easier to convince clients to go with induction cooking, which is an electric appliance cooktop. Another thing to do which is kind of more advanced and maybe for a bigger renovation, is to install an ERV, which is an energy recovery ventilation unit, which essentially exhausts the air out of the kitchen and injects fresh air into the kitchen while not losing a lot of the heat that you've already paid to heat your home, for instance. Another way to make your kitchen more sustainable is to use less water. Don't leave the water running when you're not using it. That's an obvious one, but and a lot of the codes actually for bath and for kitchens require restrictors and restrict the amount of water coming out of the fixture. And I would say that that's a really good thing, but it's a bad thing when you take the restrictors out,
Right.
which some people do.
Yes, once they find out how to do that.
Right.
I think I remember in your own kitchen out there on Long Island, you
Mhm.
had a very innovative type of cabinet material.
Well,
I believe it had fabric doors.
yeah, that's true, but that's not necessarily a sustainability thing. But from this Italian company, they actually designed the upper doors with a stretch fabric,
Mm-hmm.
which is quite nice. It's very light. Um, the cabinets are made of mostly they're wood covered with a laminate, or they're metal that's spray painted. And I do find that I really like my kitchen a lot. And it's the countertop is so simple that it's crazy. It's just white Formica type laminate. And I keep thinking back of all the kitchens I've done and all the stone places I've been to and the marble and the coating and all the stuff you have to do to make your natural stone countertop so impervious, where this Formica is, this laminate is amazing. Nothing stains it. It's really great. The other thing that's important is, I think in a kitchen is always important, is to be able to extract the smoke and smells. So I always try to put in a extracting hood.
Do you look for ones that are smart hoods that talk to the cooktop?
No, I haven't done that yet. But when it comes to cabinets, there are organizations that you could look for in a manufacturer of cabinets that will ensure that things are more sustainable. There's something called the Kitchen Compact, spelled with a K, and that's kcma.org. But kitchen cabinet companies subscribe to that, and when they do, their kitchen cabinets are made in a more sustainable way using FSB lumber and things like that. And there is something else called Environmental Stewardship Program, called ESP, which also is a good label to look for from a kitchen cabinet company. And kind of the most important thing to look for in a kitchen cabinet company is using materials that don't have formaldehyde.
Let's move over to the bathroom. Talk about materials or systems, technologies that minimize waste in the bath.
Yep. So again, water becomes an important thing. I shouldn't have to say it, but if you're brushing your teeth, you just have to turn the water on to get your toothbrush wet and then turn it off. You don't have to keep it running, right? Because water is a precious resource. The other thing that you can do is, if you're designing something from scratch, or even when you're doing just a bathroom renovation, having a hot water recirculation loop saves water. So you may have a house that you turn on the hot water and it takes 5 minutes for it to get hot. So every time you do that, those 5 minutes of water running are down the drain. But when
Literally.
it's recirculating, the water comes up right away, the hot water. So you use less water. And if you're designing a new house, you can do that hot water loop from the beginning, from the hot water heater. But if you're not designing a new house, there are devices now that underneath inside your bathroom vanity, you could connect the water and there's a circulation pump that will allow you to do the same thing. So
Now,
that's
is this the same thing as an inline heat pump to
no,
heat the water?
no. What you're talking about is in a couple of things. Sometimes you can put a hot water electric heater right underneath in your vanity, and it'll heat the water as you're using it. That also saves water. But this is different. This connects the hot and the cold in a loop that allows the hot water to kind of be running in a way like there's a loop of hot water running, so that when you turn it on, there's different ways of doing it. There's motion sensors, there's just turning on the water starts that circulation pump going, and it'll bring the hot water up pretty quickly. Another thing you can do is to make hot water. Traditionally, we've used hot water heaters that were either gas. So there's a little furnace inside this big tank, or electric. And they're both the electric's very energy inefficient, and the gas uses fossil fuels. So to use less fossil fuels and to be more efficient, there's now something called a heat pump hot water heater. So a heat pump hot water heater is essentially a mini heat pump producing hot into the tank, and the byproduct is cold dehumidified air. So it's actually a good thing to use in a cellar, because while it's making you hot water, it's dehumidifying your cellar. But that also is an energy saver that's good to use. And then low flow fixtures, as I mentioned before, don't take out the restrictors.
Have you ever installed a gray water system into a single family residence? Do you know if this is feasible right now?
Yeah, I have not. It seems a bit messy, but seems like a great idea to reuse certain water for certain things.
When you say messy, is that because of code, or
No.
because of installers' unfamiliarity with the technology?
Well, you bring up a good point. For all this new technology, it's hard to find installers that are familiar with these things. So that's one thing that I'd have to say that makes it more difficult to kind of be a first or a second adapter. But gray water, I don't believe you can do it in New York City, but you might be able to do it in other outlying areas. I say it messy only because it's two different systems now, right? It's your regular domestic water and your gray water. And, I'm not exactly sure what's required in terms of filtration and testing. And, I just don't have familiarity with it, although I'm very familiar with the concept of it. So I don't have any personal familiarity.
Well, again, it's always hard to be the innovator sometimes.
Right, right. But I remember reading about it even back in the 70s with the Whole Earth catalog.
Ah,
People were doing it back then, and you could do it.
what about general building materials that designers can specify to minimize waste and enhance sustainability?
Well, I mean, for me, the big thing here is probably not applicable to, doing a bathroom renovation in your home in a sense, because what I'm going to say is that prefab construction is certainly a way to minimize waste. When a house is built in a factory, they're able to almost use everything, I believe. And what's left over from one construction gets used in the next. So it's a real sustainable way of building. The difficulty is, you can't build a bathroom module and then stick it in your house. So that's the only thing. This prefab is really for building projects, building houses, building multifamily. You can save a lot of waste that way. But in terms of building materials, it's hard to say. There's a lot of data on things, but I'm always suspect about the sustainability of some of these things. Like, for instance, you could buy stone from Italy, not that expensively, but just think about how much energy it took to get it out of the mountain, cut it, ship it, cut it again, polish it, and the price you pay is minuscule. It's like hard to believe you could buy this for less than $20 a square foot. So how sustainable is that? And when you talk about alternates to that, like porcelain or quartz countertops or things like that, there's a lot of energy that goes into the factories that make these things. So I'm I have to admit, I'm kind of confused as a designer, as an architect, on what is really the most sustainable materials.
I know in some sectors there is a labeling process. I believe it's called the product declaration form.
Mhm.
That can be helpful to people who are trying to ascertain what the exact nature of a product is.
Yes, yes, you can actually, you could get a lot of information about all these products. It's true. But I guess I'm skeptical because I became skeptical of LEED as well over the years, because I was doing a townhouse in the city where we were starting to go for LEED and found that we could possibly get LEED on this townhouse, but yet it had a 2-car garage and it was for a single person. And that didn't seem very sustainable to me at all. So, I take these metrics with a grain of salt. But it's good to try to do the right thing.
Wise words. In closing, is there a guiding philosophy to your design process that you might share with our audience?
Yeah, I mean, this was a good segue, because what I just said is really my guiding philosophy. Is basically, when I talk to clients, I really don't force anything on them. I really say, do what you can towards being sustainable, and don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Just, whatever steps you can do, and don't worry about it. You did the best you could, and that was it. That's my guiding philosophy.
Well, thank you very much, Wayne Turett, for joining us today on KBB's From the Tap.
Sure. Thank you for having me.